Welcome to the Strange Brew podcast. My name's Jason Barnard, and I've got the great pleasure of talking to Damon Minchella here today on the Strange Brew. Many of you will know him as a founding bassist and songwriter with Ocean Colour Scene, as well as, for quite a period of time, a bassist with Paul Weller and Richard Ashcroft. He's got an absolutely fascinating story, and along the way, he's played with the likes of The Who and Paul McCartney, and he's got a autobiography or memoir out, and it's called You'd Look Good on a Donkey, Britpop Bass Lines and Baddish Decisions. Welcome, Damon.
Hi, Jason, and thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's fantastic, and I guess the obvious question to start is the "You'd Look Good on a Donkey" reference. And reading your book, is that Ian Brown who said that?
Yeah, it was Ian Brown, and it's quite a funny book. So it seemed like the perfectly funny / daft title to have because, oh God, it must have been about 96, 97. So I bumped into him somewhere because he used to live around the corner from me for a while. I was out somewhere in a nightclub, I think, and Ian was in there, and he was like, fucking hell, Minchella. You'd look great on a Porsche, but you'd also look good on a fucking donkey, which I took as massive, massive praise because the Roses were the reason why Ocean Colour Scene formed. They were the reason why the Verve formed, the reason why Oasis formed, etc., etc. And their first album was just like so important to all of us in that sort of time period. And obviously Ian was the front man and he was like one of the figureheads of cool. So to get that was high praise indeed. So when I was thinking of a title, that came to me really quickly. And it's also a bit silly as well, which I kind of like. So yeah, hence the daft title.
But your personality and stories come across in the book in that you've decided to avoid the strictly chronological
Yeah.
approach, which can typically with rock memoirs can have the risk of becoming cliched, and you've avoided that and you've brought a lot of your personality to it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've read quite a few of them. I think I talk about it in the book quite early on. So you kind of know what's going to happen next. And when you're writing about yourself, you kind of things you've totally forgotten about just start pinging and appearing in what coming into mind. But then those memories are never in a chronological order anyway. So I thought, well, I'm not going to write the book in a straightforward, I was born and then tick tock, tick tock, tock, carry on and carry on. And I'm still alive, but I'm way older. That's too obvious. And some of my favorite memoirs, which are like on the real, like serious literary end, like Nabokov and Garcia Marquez and all these people, they don't write from start to the end. So I thought, well, if it's good enough for them, then who am I to argue as a lowly musician writing a book? So yeah, and I thought it's just more interesting as well. So otherwise, it's like there's loads of boring stuff, and then you get to the really interesting stuff about the bands, and then you leave the bands, and then you do other stuff, and it starts to get less interesting. So I thought let's keep it a bit spicy as it goes along. you know.
It seems a good time as well because there's sufficient distance from a lot of the events, but at the same time, you seem to have got yourself in a good place now. You've got a great balance in terms of your personal life, bits of music. So it does feel like a good time to get it all written up.
Yeah, yeah, it's a totally different lens. And it's often a lot of people ask, even just normal conversations in a pub or if you're doing an interview, people are like, oh, what was it like during the Britpop times? It must have been like an amazing thing. But what people forget is that was just your day-to-day, everyday life. You're doing something with your friends, and there's friends in other bands like Oasis and whatnot, who your friends are also doing other stuff, and you hang out and you go and do stuff. But then everyone with a revisionist lens calls it something like it was this like unified scene, which it really wasn't. And you're right, it's like having that distance from it. You can look back at it with a clearer picture as to, what was good, what wasn't good. Also, what's interesting to talk about for other people. Because if you write a book about yourself, you're not writing it just for yourself because you wouldn't bother. You want to write it for other people to enjoy. So having that time distance and also still be doing the music at a, dare I say, even like possibly higher level, considering the shows we've just done with Oasis, which are like the biggest gigs, well, the world has ever seen. It's a great time to be finishing off the book whilst I was in the middle of the Oasis tour as well, which gave it a whole new lease of life as to it's not just something that's really old and out of date. It's actually come almost like full circle into this sort of bigger sort of euphoria about this sort of music. So it's kind of like a perfect Yeah, perfect time, really. Yeah.
And one of the other things that comes across as well is, if we're going to start covering Ocean Colour Scene, is actually they're often tagged as a mod revival type band, purely the 60s and whatever, but actually the influences of all the members, including yourself, you start discussing what got you interested in music, and that's Echo and the Bunnymen.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Echo and the Bunnymen was the first music I heard that blew my mind, which, and they're definitely not a mod band on any level. Far too sort of in the shadows with lots of dry ice and looking mean and moody, and never with a straightforward lyrical story. Whereas obviously, a lot of the classic mod music draws its lyrical influence from soul music, Motown, Northern Soul, which generally are love songs, really, or some song railing against something, but they're quite narratively obvious. And whereas the music I got into via the Bunnymen was then the Velvet Underground, the Stooges, real hardcore American punk and everything, which was just like very obscure. Then getting into all the 70s American punk then led me into like Husker Du and Black Flag and Big Black and all these Minor Threat, which is again is not mod, and it's a totally different musical landscape. Then through hearing loads of other things, I ended up getting into like Public Enemy, which then leads you into, because of all the samples, into jazz music. And then that starts bringing it around to soul music. And then you start hearing things that you've heard in Small Faces, samples, and the whole thing kind of spirals around. And then there's like three of the people in the band. One was definitely a mod, which is Steve. Simon was really into folk music. And then Oscar was really into reggae. So even though we might have worn mod clothing at times, because we liked the clothes, and there was that sharpness that kind of fitted hand in hand with the sort of Britpop scene, if you like, that came out after the Roses, where everything stopped being uber baggy clothes but there was still a trend. It came from like the whole football casual thing. It just got baggier, and then it all kind of narrowed down to slimmer fitting stuff, but it was still sharp, and that really suited us. So yeah, we used to get tagged with the whole mod thing, and it wasn't helped by the audience, who'd always sing "We Are the Mods" before we came on stage, much to the annoyance of Simon, our singer, who utterly hated it, though he wasn't going to argue with 10,000 people every night.
So take us back to 1987 or 1988, the music scene and getting into groups, and then eventually linking up with Simon for the Fanatics.
That's right, yeah. So I was in a load of bands at school with some very, very interesting names, which are in the book, very funny names. I had a terribly named band, which we couldn't get any gigs, so I thought I'd change the name. And I called the band Shit, because I thought that would get us more gigs. Actually, it was an acronym for Solihull High Street International Terrace. It did the opposite. We didn't get any gigs whatsoever. So then formed another band, very short-lived, called, and I apologize now, but at the time it was fine, a band called The Queers, where I was actually the lead singer. No, I was actually the drummer. We had a guitarist, the drummer, and a singer, and we did one gig just before we went on stage. The singer decided he wanted to play drums, so I had to sing, and I'd never sung and he'd never played drums. But that was supporting a band called The Great Betrayal, which Simon was the lead singer on, and he was certainly impressed by my singing to ask me if I wanted to be the bass player, which kind of didn't make any sense. But I was relieved because I was actually a bass player, not a drummer or a singer. So that's how we kind of got it together. But prior to meeting Simon, then after I got in a band Simon, we used to go to every gig we could in Birmingham, whereas most of the local bands were terrible. But then for a while in Birmingham, it was amazing to get all these American bands coming in. We saw the Pixies on their first ever UK show supporting Throwing Muses. And they blew me and Simon away. It was like incredible. And we saw Suicide when they reformed, and amazing sort of desert rock bands from the Paisley Underground sort of period. They're like the incredible Thin White Rope, Giant Sand. We saw Jane's Addiction on their first tour. These are in tiny clubs in Birmingham with no stages. And we were just like, we want to do that, but we know we can do that. Possibly different, maybe even better. Not the Pixies, but everyone else was like, yeah, we could maybe better. So we started building the Fanatics into a better band than we were at the time, which involved Oscar joining. And then eventually we met Steve. Well, we already knew Steve, but he joined after we'd all been to see Stone Roses gig in Birmingham. And Steve had gone separately, and we were all talking about it. So it seemed like, well, this is the band that we really should get together. So everything sort of coalesced with happenstance, really, not with planning, just with desire, as most bands are. desire, but no real direction, just to try and we want to be better. How can we be better? We don't know. And eventually, it's either happens or it doesn't. And we were lucky and stubborn enough to make it happen, whereas a lot of people aren't stubborn enough.
And what sort of music was it in the Fanatics? Was it kind of Manchester is a huge cliche now, or was it just more sort of guitar?
It would be doing us a slight injustice to say we were a Velvet Underground Buzzcocks ripoff, but I think that would be a really good way to describe it. But Simon was finding his feet as a songwriter. Me and Simon were massively in love with the Velvet Underground, but we played faster and we weren't American. So the next sort of way to look at it was more like Buzzcocks side of punk. So we weren't out and out punk. We were influenced by all the American, like no wave scene music, and also going back early to the Velvet Underground. But for us, it was like, okay, it's like the English side of it. We played fast songs. It was quite Buzzcocksy because we were trying to be really tuneful as well. So, and this was before the sort of Manchester, which is what it was called, broke. But that kind of broke whilst we were trying to find our feet as the Fanatics. So yeah, we weren't like that at all.
Was it Steve joining like a missing piece? Was he the thing that brought you together and meant that it just lifted things because it just was a better fit? And obviously Steve's a great musician.
Yeah, I mean, it totally changed because Oscar had already joined. So we had like a good rhythm section, obviously a great singer and great burning songwriter. And the guitarist we had, a guy called Paul, was lovely, but he was such a massive hippie. And all he ever wanted to do was have a blues jam, which is all right for 5 minutes, but that's all he wanted to do. So it was like, and him and Simon had this horrendous falling out. So it was like, we need a guitarist. We'd seen Steve at the Stone Roses gig. I didn't like Steve. We weren't friends. Simon just basically hoodwinked me into going into well, I thought we were just going to pick up something from our house. And then we went into the garage of Steve's dad's house, and Steve was in there with a guitar ready to go and just played a Hendrix song, who was my favorite guitarist and still is. And I was like, okay, well, I don't like you, but we've got to be in a band together. So he was the missing piece, because then all of a sudden we had a musical elevation, and we had someone who was really committed and didn't just want to do blues jams, but who wanted to actually get out of the doldrums of suburban Birmingham and like make something of ourselves.
I think one of the earlier incarnations of Fanatics, where I don't know if it's just two, I don't even know if Oscar was in the group at the time, had was it a 12-inch out?
Yeah.
So you'd done something, but what meant that ultimately you renamed yourselves and became Motion Colour Scene?
When Steve joined, and we were like, well, we don't want to sound like we used to sound like, I think, because we were starting to go out of the sort of fast, sort of melodic, punky sort of thing. I wanted to sort of extend ourselves a bit. And, the band had gone from me and Simon, two totally different musicians, to me and Simon with two completely new musicians. And Steve brought someone else into it. And we were like, let's just change the name. And the four of us just got really stoned and went to a library when the library still existed. And we just got a dictionary each and just put our fingers on a page and just wrote down whatever word was there, made a list whilst laughing loads. We didn't want to be called The. We wanted to have something that didn't really mean anything, but sounded cool. And then someone put that Ocean Colour and Scene together. And because we were so stoned, we were like, this is the most stupid name ever, but it's hilarious. Let's keep it. Then for the next sort of week or stuff, we'd be bumping into mates who were going, oh, what's the new name of the band? And we were almost too nervous to tell them because it just sounded so silly. And when we eventually started telling people, they're like, oh, that's cool. What does it mean? And we were like, no, it doesn't mean anything. But then obviously people start to think it means something. And I suppose the name of the band only reflects the music if the music's any good. Because, Echo and Bunnymen is a terrible name. But if you love the music, it's the coolest name in the world. I'm not a Jam fan, but if you love the Jam, it's probably the best name for a band ever. When really, the Jam is a terrible early 1970s pub band name.
It's the same with Oasis.
Yeah, it's awful, isn't it? It's a terrible name. Yeah. Also, so's The Verve.
Oh, Verve. Yeah, it was Verve at the start, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, and they had to put the in front of it so they didn't get sued. A funny story was they were going to just take the E off the end and put out a press statement dropping an E for America. And their record label was like, you can't do that.
How long did it start for things to pick up? So you've relabeled yourself Ocean Colour Scene. Steve's really got into the band. You must have been really starting to play and then develop new material. How
Yeah,
long did it take from that moment that you saw yourselves as Ocean Colour Scene to people are starting to come to shows and maybe you're getting a bit of label interest?
it was really bizarrely quick because we were kind of like stuck in Birmingham. Local gigs for local people were in the Fanatics. And then we did our first gig as Ocean Colour Scene at some pub in Stoke-on-Trent, but it went really well. And we were building up the songs. And then we did another gig somewhere. Then we got a support with the Charlatans. Then we got a support with Ride. And they were the darlings of the music press, but became really good friends with them and they loved us. So they started talking about us to people in the music press. The next thing we know, I think 6 gigs in, we were playing a terrible gig in Manchester in terms of the audience. There was only about 15 people there. And we were going to pull it, but we played it anyway because we'd gone all the way up to Manchester. And there happened to be a journalist from the Melody Maker in the audience who wrote the most ridiculous live reviews saying we were basically better than the Beatles, the Stone Roses, and the Lars all rolled into one, which is like very kind of him. Very kind of him. Absolute bullshit. We were just kind of finding our feet and probably a decent band. But because he said that, we immediately started getting record label offers, literally. So having only put out one very low selling 12-inch on a local record label, as the Fanatics, all of a sudden we've got a fielding off. All our manager was fielding offers from major record labels. The press was saying, "Oh, this is going to be the next biggest band in the world." Blah blah blah. What they didn't know is we only didn't really have enough songs because none of the labels had been serious. They just started offering us deals, which is just insanity. I guess that kind of uncovers the vagaries of the music industry, where like odd things happen, because someone says something's cool, everyone else goes, "Oh, it must be cool. We need it." It was fortunate for us. It became a double-edged sword because we obviously, when we made the first album, we didn't really know what we were doing, and it became a bit of it was a fraught, long process and very disappointing process making the first album. But hey,
Certainly in that early period, the songwriting credits seem to be just to Ocean Colour Scene. Was that a conscious decision, given that it often creates a lot of issues to songwriting credits?
yeah, absolutely. Early doors when the four of us got together and said, "Okay, we got the name. We're just going to split everything." I mean, we had nothing, so that's an easy decision to say, "Let's split everything." That's going to be brilliant. And I would say the vast majority of bands, probably like pushing 99% of them, split up because someone's getting less money than someone else. And also then puts too much pressure on. If it's like, oh, one person's writing the songs, then the other 3, what are they doing? That's not fair on the one person writing the songs on, because we'd all chip in. Even if it was a song that Simon had written, it would be a very loose format, like 3, 4, 5 chords on an acoustic guitar, no set tempo, lyrics not quite finished. And then it would come, well, let's turn it into something that's actually a piece of music. So even then, the music is being written by the other 3. And then quite often me and Steve would come up with instrumentals, like, the obvious ones, which you can hear and listen to later, Ocean Colours and ones. You go, well, it's clearly that starts off with a piece of music. And then Simon would write over it. And Oscar would come up with chord changes from time to time. And so it was a very much everyone doing their own thing to make a piece of music, or to make an idea, a potentially great piece of music, whatever that needed. So, and it was fortunate because then obviously you don't end up with those hideous arguments like, yeah, but I wrote it, so we're going to play it tonight, so I get all the PRS, which is a thing that a lot of musicians do now as well. So yeah, it was a conscious decision founded on the fact that we had nothing, so let's split it all.
Was Steve's dad managing you at this point?
Yeah.
So how did he get involved? Because I know you had earlier management, and I think that came back to bite you rather unfairly later. But
Yes, we did have a manager when we were in the Fanatics, but as I talk about in the book, that went very pear-shaped very quickly and came back to cost us, me and Simon, an absolute fortune. But Steve's dad, Chris, was managing the band that Steve was in at the time. Just doing local gigs, just looking at, when I say managing him, I'm basically driving the van, trying to get his son gigs. But Chris was an ex-copper. He was very clued up, he'd seen a lot of bad things, and he knew how to handle himself in terms of physically. Knew how to handle himself in terms of carrying himself in a meeting, all those kind of things that makes a good manager. So with Steve joining, it was like, well, Steve, will your dad be our manager? Will Chris be our manager? And it's like, and he was like, yeah, of course I will. So all of a sudden we went from like, we got an amazing guitarist, and now we got a manager who clearly we're going to trust because he's the guitarist's dad. So yeah, so that all changed very quickly. And then it was obviously, we were helped very much so by the guy from Melody Maker saying we were better than all the best bands in the world rolled into one. Kind of made Chris's job quite easy in getting gigs and record deals.
How did you choose the label? If you had a few choices, was it the label that offered you the most? Was it freedom? Was it a contact that you had an affinity with?
We loved the idea because it was on, so it was part of Polydor, but the label was Fontana, and we were all obsessed with Scott Walker. So it was like, oh my God, we're going to release records on the label that not only Scott Walker did, but also flipping Frank Sinatra. I mean, come on, this is amazing. And we'd signed to a really small, another independent label in Birmingham, which was run by our publisher, who managed the Fine Young Cannibals. We didn't know what a publisher was.
Is that funny label called or something? I can't pronounce it.
Yeah. It was named after an obscure film, and we were just like, yeah, fine, because we didn't really know what was a good label, what was a bad label. So via Chris and our publisher, and we didn't even know what our publisher did, there was loads of offers filled, and when the Fontana one came on the table, they liked it, and we were like, Scott Walker's record label, it's got to be them. What we didn't read the contract. What we didn't realize, we had no creative control. The guy who was head of A&R was deciding everything, but we didn't know because we got a tiny advance each, which meant we could like sign off the dole for a bit. It was incredible. Looking back now, the amount of money they gave us is pathetic. But when you're on the dole, that was a huge amount of money.
So how did that recording process work? Because you released some, I don't know if they were singles or 12 inches, and it took an age to get that album out. And I know that you worked with a number of producers and had to re-record the album. So how did that develop from the first sessions to, I don't know, it seemed to take years.
It did, yeah, I know, which was ended up why the music press ended up hating us, because they made a big fuss about us. But that was before we'd signed to Fontana. So we'd released a couple of 12 inches on records.
Right.
First one was Sway, which we played on the telly. And then the second...
The Word.
Yes, on the Words with Terry Christian, bless him. The second one, bear in mind, this was a tiny independent label, actually went in the charts at 49. It almost made the top 40.
That's good going.
Yeah, I know. So that was under our own steam, just using a studio in Redditch. So an engineer called Dave Morris, but we mixed it. Well, he mixed it for us, but we just said turn everything up because we didn't really know what we were doing. So that had done well. And then we've signed to a major record label. They've given us this production duo of Jimmy Miller, Beck, Traffic, Rolling Stones, legend, mixed with Steve Osborne, who had done like the Mondays and Sabres of Paradise and all this. So on paper, it was a perfect mix of, the 60s and the baggy scene, the Manchester scene. But Jimmy wasn't in a state to produce a record. Steve was really good, but he couldn't take charge. And then the guy who was head of the record label just kept coming down to the studio and wanting to change everything, because we're about to finish off the first version. Then you got Stone Road, the sort of Manchester scene when we're making it. Then that falls to pieces. Then grunge happened. So there's the record label kept changing producers. So we made the album about 3 times. And by the time we got to the end, halfway through making the third version, we didn't care. We just wanted to never listen to it again. So that's why it took so long. And when it came out, it wasn't very good. So it made the music press look a bit silly.
If you re-recorded it a few times, were any of those versions good? Because I can see the germ of some really good ideas and songs, but it sounds of its time. The version that went out feels a bit dated.
Yeah, it's really dated. And I think it wasn't the producer's faults either. It came directly from the record label. They were trying to fit us into something that was happening currently instead of letting us sound like we sound, which is obviously then what we went on to do with Moseley Shoals, which was the game changer. So that's why it sounded dated. It was that typical major record label thing of, a new genre, a new scene is happening and everyone's into that. This artist who still haven't released the album, we're in the middle of making it, let's make it fit into this new scene, which is ridiculous.
You're already behind by the time you've released it.
Exactly. And you should never try and fit in with something anyway. So that's why it doesn't sound good. There's some good songs on there that if we'd done them on our own when we were making Moseley Shoals, Marchin Already, if we hadn't written even better songs by then, they would have sounded great. Because by then we could play and we knew what we wanted to do and how to make space in music, which is the key ingredient to making music sound good. Is it's the bits between all the notes, which may sound a bit, airy-fairy and philosophical, but it's actually real. But we didn't know. So yeah, that's why it sounded dated. So none of the producers, it's their fault. And they're all lovely people. And Tim Palmer, who did the last version, I'm still friends with him now. He's an incredibly talented producer and mixer and a great person. So yeah, the blame for that solely lies at the feet of the record label, who spent a fortune. I mean, absolute disgraceful amount of money.
Was it some of the final recordings were at Paul Weller's studio? Am I getting the timeline right
here? Yeah, no, you got it right. We did some of it there. So I think maybe some of the second version of it we ended up doing at Solid Bond Studios, which also used to be Fontana Record Studios, which was kind of like, oh my God. So wait, you go into the vocal booth and you think, Scott Walker's been in here, Frank Sinatra's been in here. So all that was great. And that's how we met Paul in the first place. And also at the same time in the back room at the studio, there was this little fella called Brendan Lynch, who was mixing an album that was about to come out by the Young Disciples called Road to Freedom. So that's how we got to meet Brendan as well, who obviously comes into the story much later on.
So when did some of the new songs start arriving, and when did the commitment to start recording demos coming? Was that when Steve started playing with Paul, or was it that you were starting to write some good material even before Paul properly came on the scene?
Yeah, this was pre-Steve and then me working with Weller. So once we'd finally finished the first album, the record label, I think they wanted to get rid of us. So they put us on this 7-month tour of America, thinking they'll go away on that. They'll all hate each other. They'll split up and we can just get rid of them. But we went on this tour of America. We didn't split up and hate each other. We got even better as a band. We really worked out how to play live together. So when we came back, we started doing demos in this appalling studio we had, which included a demo for Day We Caught the Train, wasn't The Circle, it was something else, which ended up on Moseley Shoals. Sent them to Fontana, and they were just like, these songs are shit. How could you not? How could even the demos weren't that great, but they were good enough to hear? How could you hear The Day We Caught the Train and go, no, that's shit? I mean, that's ridiculous. So at that point, we were like, well, fuck this. And we kind of engineered a kind of tools down situation, and they wanted to get rid of us. So it was like, yeah, okay, let's not be in a business relationship anymore, us on that record label. And that's when we were like, okay, well, now we're all back on the dole. We're all a little bit older, but we're a really good band now. We know exactly what we don't want to sound like. We've written these songs a couple of songs that we know are really good. Let's go down that road. So that road carried on for about a year. And during that time, Steve got the call from Weller to go and play on the band touring Wildwood, I think it was. So then Steve would start coming back with loads of amazing tapes that Weller would give Steve. All these bands we'd had never thought of listening to, which then started to influence us as we were building up to the making of what ultimately we would be Moseley Shoals, but at the time was just better and better demos of better and better songs. And then, so the influence, Paul's initial influence was just from giving us loads of music to listen to.
It seems that Paul's support, in a way, that I think, wasn't Steve, he was kind of starting to, because he was earning at least some income as opposed to being on the dole, he was able to fund your studio activities. And then at some point, was it that Paul Weller asked you guys to support him in Leeds?
Yeah, so this was actually this was after we'd met Paul and when we were halfway through making the first album. He had a couple of gigs that he wanted us to support, which was the Kilburn National in London and Portsmouth Guildhall. So we played those, and that was fine. And that's when I first met Steve White, Paul's drummer. But then 2 years later, Paul's asked Steve to be in his band. And then the year after that, Paul asked me to be in his band for the tour, the next album. So all of a sudden, me and Steve have got a bit of money. And through the guy who'd signed Paul to Go Discs, who wanted to sign us, but the label was too small, a guy called Andy McDonald, he gave us 10 grand in cash, which is it was just an obscene amount of money to us, and some studio equipment. So we were able to rent a better studio, which just turned out to be the studio that Dexy's Midnight Runners made their first 2 albums in, which isn't a shithole of a studio, but it was actually a proper studio, so it sounded good. So we were like, okay, well, let's make an album ourselves, or let's make some really, really good demos. So that's what we started doing. So I worked out how to engineer, and that's what we did for about a year or maybe 6 months. Our plan was to just record everything for a year. And everything started to fall into place, and we're like, this is a really good record.
And Steve's dad put his remortgaged his house, is that right?
Yes, he did. Yeah.
I mean, that is one hell of a risk.
I remember one day, it was like just after Chris had remortgaged his house, I had to drive from where I was in the Midlands to pick up Simon the singer, to pick up Oscar the drummer. So these are different areas, like go up to Handsworth to get Oscar, then drive to just outside Leicester to Steve's dad's house. And to make enough money for the petrol, I got together £2.62 in 2p pieces. And after that, I had nothing left. I had no money, literally, to drive over to Chris's so we could all have like a band meeting to decide what we were going to do and blah, blah, blah. That's how broke we all were. Yeah. Getting £2.62 together in 2p pieces. And then I had nothing. Didn't even have a penny.
You might have been potless, but you seem to have like a wealth of demos and ideas, because I've heard that, was it like 72 songs or pieces of music to work with?
Yeah, by the time we came to the point of like, okay, well, we've got an album, it was like, which became Moseley Shoals, we had 72 things we'd recorded, which were from pretty good to absolutely fantastic. Whereas a lot of bands, but they'll get 10, 15 songs, I think they've got an album. But we had like, really out of those 72, there's probably 4 albums worth of material there. But we were just really enjoying it as well, because we didn't really have financial pressures, because me and Steve were earning a bit with Paul, which would help pay for the other 2. But what was best was that we had no interference from anybody. And we were really into music. We were really inspired by loads of music. We were getting better and better and understanding how to make things sound really good in the studio. And I think it got to the point where halfway through that first year, after 6 months, we had 72 songs. We were like, we need to turn this into a record. But obviously we couldn't mix it because we didn't have that level of skill. But it's like, I think this is the record. We've got this here. We just need to get it out there. We need to finish it and get it out there, thinking it would do okay. We wouldn't have any hits or anything, but at least we'd have done that thing we always wanted to do, was to make a great record.
And that enmeshing or involvement with Paul just seemed to deepen. Was it at one time, I don't know if it was just before you signed the new deal, you were kind of all on tour with Paul, or all playing or guesting with him in some capacity?
Yeah, it's like Ocean Colour Scene were on Weller's tour bus for the entire Stanley Road tour, because me and Steve were playing with Paul, and Simon and Oscar were the support band playing Ocean Colour Scene songs. And then obviously through that, where we became even stronger friends with Brendan, who we'd met when he was mixing the Young Disciples album. And the engineer that Brendan worked with, a guy called Max Hayes, we became friends with him. So they were the obvious 2 guys to ask to turn Moseley Shoals in from really good demos by mixing them into a finished album, which they did for free because we didn't have enough to pay them. Idiots. But it's very, very good of them. But they loved the music, and they loved our attitude of, well, we haven't got much equipment, but they were amazed we'd made things sound so good with such crap equipment. They're like, wow, well, we've got to help them out. So again, it was one of those things, like when we decided we'd split everything 4 ways, we said to them, we'll give you loads of good royalties. But we hadn't sold 1 copy. So it's basically like, again, we'll give you loads of money eventually, possibly, maybe. And they said, yeah, okay, let's do it. And that was like the Weller connection there. And obviously he played on a few bits and bobs on the record as well.
So how did Oasis and Noel Gallagher come on the scene? Was that kind of indirectly through Paul?
Yeah, well, we'd been asked again through the guy who used to manage the Finding Cannibals, who was our earlier publisher, who set up Records. For some reason, it came across his antenna that Oasis were looking for a support act for the Live Forever tour. And we'd met Noel through hanging out with Paul. So we met Noel. So a cassette was given via our publisher to Noel's management, who then just gave it to Noel. Bearing in mind, on this cassette is The Day We Caught the Train, which our previous record label thought was shit. And Noel just offered us the support for the Live Forever tour. So this is the single before Definitely Maybe came out.
So this is just about when they're starting to rise, but was it like 500 to 1,000 or low thousands?
Yeah. There was like, I think the biggest gig was the Astoria, so in London, which held about 1,000. So they were about 400 to 1,000 capacity, which is crazy to think of it now that on their Live Forever tour, they were playing glorified pubs or very small theatres. But that's what it was like then. But it wasn't until obviously Definitely Maybe came out, and then all of a sudden it's like it steamrollers and ends up in Nebworth playing to 250,000 people. So that was very early doors. But again, then we just became friends with them. Because I think everyone around us who were like names like Paul and Oasis and whatnot just really dug our attitude of like, yeah, but we believe in this. And we were always really sociable with everyone. I think everyone's like, let's just help these guys out because they're really cool.
There's something in the air as well, because it was like Paul Weller had a fallow period and then was really rising up again with some amazing material. And then you had a new wave of British bands, often with a 60s influence coming in. So there seemed to be something pushing you in the right direction, and the time was right.
Yeah. I mean, it's that thing you can't rehearse being in the right place at the right time, which we kind of were, but we're doing, and people go, oh, you were lucky. Well, that's absolute bollocks, because the only reason why we were there is because we were the only ones who put up with that, not having a pot to piss in. Record label telling us we were shit. All the music journalists telling us we should just split up. And we were like, yeah, but we're not going to listen to you. We're going to make loads of good music.
Because you'd been on the dole on and off for years by now.
Yeah, shocking. The fact after spending £2.62 on some petrol, I had no money. I mean, it's like, oh my God, most people just go, and all your mates have got proper jobs and they've got cars, and you've got like, I can't even afford to buy a box of matches, let alone a packet of cigarettes. And then the people around us, as you said, you had that resurgence because Weller had come through. He made the first solo album, which was starting to pick up interest, then Wildwood exploded, and then obviously you got Oasis about to explode. Combined with that, of course, then you've got things like British TV and British mainstream radio are starting to play guitar music again, which is exactly at the time as when we've eventually finished Moseley Shoals and we've got a single about to come out. We were at the right time, but not through luck, just through stubbornness and I might say like some stupidity. Like we were just convinced everything would be fine based on no evidence.
So was it that MCA were almost, you had an album there to offer them? Was it as simple as that? Was it as easy as that for them?
As easy as that. As easy as that. They came down the studio. We'd already sent us some tracks. They came down the studio. We'd already recorded another one called My Fleeting Mind. And they were like, oh my God, no, this one's too good. How are we going to fit it on the album? And we're like, well, you're going to put it on the album. Otherwise, we're not going to sign to you. And there was no discussion about creative control or anything. We're like, we do what we want to do. You have no interference. We want a tiny advance, because normally most bands would ask for loads of money. We knew how to operate with like nothing really. So we wanted a tiny advance, but all full creative control and really good royalties. And we were like, or we'll sign to someone else. And because at that point we've supported Oasis, the whole Weller connection, blah, blah, blah. And they're just like, this is such an easy fit, because we're going to give this band a tiny amount of money. If it tanks, that's fine. If it goes, well, we are the best A&R department in the world, because look, we discovered this talent, and they were really nice people. MCA, compared to the first record label, they were so nice, such good people. So yeah, that was just like an absolute, do you want it or not? And they were like, yeah. So we signed it.
The Riverboat song, so that was the first single, but you weren't anticipating it being as big as it was.
No, it was. We chose it out of fear of not having a hit. So we chose it thinking it won't be a hit. Radio won't play it, because we knew it wasn't the most catchy song on the album. It was probably the most, apart from the ballads, the most sort of obscure one, because it's like a blues song in double waltz timing with no real chorus. And we thought, but it's cool. We'll put it out. Cool people will like it. It won't be a hit, but over time, people who really like music will like it, and they'll play it to their friends. And then we could put out another song that's got a bit of a chorus and do it that way. But of course, we had the thing where the sort of serendipity of like doing a thing for Chris Evans as a favor. And then just so happened he was Breakfast Radio 1 DJ. So he starts playing the Riverboat song. We're doing the Oasis tour, which has gone crazy. All of a sudden, we're on daytime Radio 1. And you're like, shit, this 6/8 blues song and the original version was 14 minutes long as well.
Really?
Which we turned it into 4.5, but that's still too long for the radio these days. It was like, oh shit, it's gonna be a big hit.
And then he's launching TFI Friday as well.
Yeah, I know. Again, but the only reason why we got the TFI Friday is because every other band refused to do the pilot episode.
Really?
Yeah, so we did it, and then Chris Evans was like, wow, you guys are fucking amazing. If this TV show does get taken on and it becomes a thing, you can come on the first episode and I want to use your song as the unofficial theme tune. And we're like, yeah, cool. Because at that point, it hadn't been signed off. No one knew that TFI Friday was actually going to become the staple of before you go to the pub Friday night entertainment. So then it was, and we're being played on daytime Radio 1 with a song that me and Steve had written as a jam. Simon had sung over it. We edited it down, recorded it on 6 microphones in a tiny, shitty little studio. So, yeah, we were like, okay, we felt quite a lot of justification and validation, the fact that actually we're not idiots. It's not just us who likes this music now. Loads of other people are starting to talk about it.
Then Moseley Shoals, it was in the charts for about 2 years. It must have been in the top 10 for an age.
It was, yeah.
Out of so many of the albums of the era, it must have sold more than the vast majority of your peers as well. A huge seller.
It was the 7th best-selling album of 1996 in the UK.
And this is when CDs were huge sellers and they cost an arm and a leg, not like streaming now.
Yeah. No, exactly. So then all of a sudden you got the double-edged sort of thing. Like, we've gone from nothing, £2.62 to try and get some petrol money together. So then all of a sudden you're getting these like checks from the record label going, Jesus Christ. And then hand in hand with that, of course, we're no longer playing pubs. We're now getting towards the stage where we're playing arenas, which we then hit with the follow-up album, Marchin Already. Then all of a sudden it's like, wow, now we've actually got money so we can buy things like cars and houses.
Such a contrast. You've gone from like trying to scrape copper up £2 to literally you must be just getting checks sent in.
And it's weird because then people are giving you free clothes, trying to give you guitars and amps and stuff. It's like we needed those like earlier, not now. It is that funny thing though. You just like boxes of clothes would arrive at the studio, and so would like loads of amp manufacturers and guitar makers was going, have our things. I mean, I understand it, but it's like, oh, if only you said that to us when we didn't have enough money for some petrol.
What about some of those huge, massive gigs that Oasis did in '96, like Loch Lomond and Nebworth, where I don't know if you could see the end of where people were stood. Mm. I mean, that's just such a huge scale to be on, and it's so different to a few years before when you're just playing small gigs. It's just such a contrast.
Yeah, it is. And I think what was good for us is because we were such a tight-knit unit, and through our stubbornness, through, if you like, the wilderness years, we knew how to be a great band. So we weren't fazed by walking out to 125,000 people, because we knew as soon as we started playing, the vast majority of them would know the song and sing along. So, and the bigger the gig, the more abstract it becomes past the first, like, I don't know, 10,000 people you can see after that. It's like baked beans. It's like tiny little dots that go on forever. But you can feel them. You can feel the euphoria and the atmosphere coming back to you, which then makes you, validates the whole thing even more. So yeah, those gigs were amazing. The one that was the funniest though was Loch Lomond, where it's all Portakabin loos backstage. I'm just about to go on stage. I've got this beautiful pinstripe trousers on. I go in the Portakabin, the Portaloo, and Liam tries to push it over. And I'm just about to go on stage. Thank God he didn't have the strength to push it over. I'm in this thing having a wee and it's wobbling, going backwards and forwards. And obviously there's loads of horrible stuff in this Portaloo. If he had pushed it over, I would have come out having to go straight on stage, covered in God knows what.
Would you look like a Smurf or something?
Yeah. I've been covered in blue chemicals and lots of brown lumpy things. So thank God he didn't quite have the strength he thought he had.
The War Child album as well, and Come Together, I assume that was through Paul Weller?
So it was put together by a fellow Evertonian called Tony Crean, who worked at the record label that Paul had signed to. And obviously that Andy McDonald around, the guy who gave us the £10,000. So it was like, okay, we need to put a supergroup together. But it was basically it was Paul, Noel, and real Paul, which is Paul McCartney. So it was like Paul's band, so it was me. And that was a crazy day. I mean, that was utterly crazy day, because I've got my connection to the Beatles anyway, because my mum went to school with George Harrison. The Beatles had asked my dad to be their tour manager when they were called the Silver Beatles, which my future granddad, his dad, had said, no chance. Finish your accountancy degree. You're not going to Germany with these sodding layabouts. So I was then able to recount that to McCartney, who amazingly knew who I was and remembered my mum and dad.
Wow.
So this coalesced into this incredibly strange day. And then there was like a version 2 of that, when it was Liam replaced McCartney, but it was basically the same band to do something else for, I think it was like a Jam covers album or something.
Oh, was that the Carnation?
That's
cover?
it, yeah. So I ended up being in these 2 ad hoc supergroups, which were basically the same band, but with a different extra singer. Then people would like talk about it, like, how was that planned? These were literally just someone saying, oh, that'd be a good idea. I'll see if they're up for it. And there was no real planning behind really any of it. Incredible things to be part of.
And these were the days when, I don't know if many people know, when singles were released, there were multiple versions of the CD. They all had 3 bonus tracks on, and to. But because you had those 72 songs, ultimately a lot of those B-sides went on the compilation set, B-sides, C-sides, and free-sides. But that album, even though it was kind of a compilation of extra tracks, was better than most people's albums.
No, it's crazy. And we thought the record label were insane when they came up with the idea, because we were like, well, everyone's got them. And they said, all right, if you agree to release it, we'll limit it. So it's a limited edition album to only 250,000 copies. I mean, 250,000 copies now in terms of albums is 25 billion streams. Yeah. So we were like, no one's going to buy 250,000 copies of this. It sold out in 4 weeks. And that's when we kind of knew, well, blimey, we really are onto something here. People want to buy what our B-sides twice. But then the NME put out a really snotty review of it. This is much better than Moseley Shoals because they're not trying to be Paul Weller. It's like, what are you trying? Just get over yourselves, you know. But it's a great record as well, the B-sides one. You know, it's really, really, it's a very calm record, apart from the insanity of the Day Tripper cover at the end.
Because you've got more acoustic tracks on that.
Yeah. And like even one of them, we had an acoustic version of the Traveller's Tune, which we then reworked into a top 5 single for the next album. So like literally people bought it 3 times. Which is, and we weren't ripping people off. We just like thought, this song we could do way faster and a bit more Northern Soul and a bit more upbeat. So we thought we'll do it. Because our thing was, if people don't like it, you won't buy it. So we're not ripping anyone off.
So by the time of the release of Marchin Already album, that went into #1, didn't it?
It knocked Oasis off the top of the charts.
That's not bad.
Noel still owes me 100 quid because we had a bet. I bet him we would, and he bet me it wouldn't. And it's the best 100 quid he's never given me, to be honest with you, because that was really cool. And then the week after that, the Verve put out Urban Hymns. So at one point in the top 3 of the grown-up charts, it was the Verve, Oasis, and Ocean Colour Scene. I mean, wow. That's when I think it solidified this whole Britpop thing. And then you get Ben and Jerry's doing Britpop ice cream. And then you get the Spice Girls who are now suddenly Britpop, and everything's Britpop this and Brit rock that and Cool Britannia. And I think it was just, it was a coalesce of like quite a few really good bands being accepted by mainstream media, which allowed the general public to hear it, who obviously loved it because across all those bands, including Blur and a few others, were making really good music. So obviously people were going to love it.
And this was the period where music had still gone, or was still going through phases, and there was like a 4 or 5 year cycle. In terms of what is supposedly Britpop, it started sort of germinating 92, 93, 94. But by 97, you've gone in at #1. Do you think that was like a peak moment where the scene was starting to change and then there were some of the other bands starting to shift their sound, or slightly on a lower rank, actually just dropping like a stone?
Yeah, I think so. And it's like, it goes in cyclical anyway. And then you get people, younger bands coming out who didn't want to sound like that. So they were starting to make their different versions. And you'd have a rise, like a new wave of like club music, which then starts to become more of a feature. And on the radio and whatnot. But also what you got to think of is like most bands have a peak as well of like when they're at their best. Oasis started to dip off in terms of the quality of their music. The Verve then split up. And then because of that, things start to change, and as they naturally do. I mean, you know, everything's got its own sort of like holistic sort of movement. So things would naturally change. And obviously this is way before streaming and immediate access to music. So as soon as mainstream media are less inclined to play you all the time, means less people hear about you all the time, which for some people is probably a good thing, because then you've got younger bands coming through. Because by now, well, we were still a young band, but like we were approaching 30, and you've got like 18-year-olds who are being inspired by it, but they do their own version of the music we were making or Oasis were making. And then you get bands who come after it, like early 2000s. You'd have people like Kasabian, and then you get Catfish and the Bottlemen, who could be, if they'd been around a few years before, would have been lumped into the Britpop thing. But because they're coming slightly after it, they're doing a slightly changed version, following their own path, as they should do. So then that's no longer a scene. And then you get like noughties rock or whatever that is, you know.
Libertines and...
Yeah, of course. Yeah, Libertines being a classic one, which I completely forgot about.
What kept you guys going? Because a lot of groups, basically, they had an album that probably didn't chart, or just, was it that you still had a following, you were still producing good music, so you carried on releasing albums and singles for quite a number of years?
No, absolutely. I mean, everything we did was a hit, not at the start, but from like Riverboat onwards until the last thing that I did with the band still went in the top 20 like, as a single. So what would then happen is like, so instead of the album going in at number 1, the album would go in at number 3, or would go in at number 4, which meant then it's the obvious thing was visibility and people hearing about it. So instead of you being ranked in the front of every record store, you were in the record store, but towards the back or lower down on the shelf. You were getting less Radio 1 play, which means less people would hear about your upcoming tour, because obviously it really wasn't that much. Internet really wasn't a thing in people's lives. Yeah. So if people didn't hear about it, they wouldn't know about it. So then instead of playing arenas, you're now playing your Brixton Academies. So instead of playing 10,000, you're playing 4,000, which is still amazing. But then the next album comes out and it goes in at number 5. So then you're playing 2 town and countries to 2,500 people, which is still amazing. I'm not complaining. But obviously you go, instead of you hit that peak and then it starts to go like this. But we weren't done. I mean, they're still going. Now we weren't done because we were still had a belief that collectively what we could do was worthwhile doing, you know. And we love music. That's why we were making it. And obviously when we started, we had nothing. And by this point, we still have a lot. So let's carry on making music, you know, because when people hear about it and come to concerts, they're loving it.
And you're still playing with Paul?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I played with Paul for 12 years till Glastonbury 2007. Yeah.
Got to ask you about Live 8, because, wow. I mean, that is just insane, isn't it? Being asked to be bassist for the day with The Who at one of their biggest ever gigs.
Well, I mean, it's their biggest ever gig ever. It's the biggest gig in the world ever in terms of television audience. It was like 1/14. It was estimated that 1/14 of the world watched it on telly. And there's 250,000 people in Hyde Park. But I mean, to be asked, obviously John, bless his heart, John Entwistle, but John Entwistle was then replaced by Pino. So I'm like, okay, and then me. Well, those two are quite good at the bass. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, but I'm not at their level, I don't think. So that was very, very cool. Very full on day. And as I said in the book, we only rehearsed for an hour the day before. So I didn't really know the songs we were playing that well, because I was never a massive Who fan. I appreciate the Who, but I wouldn't like necessarily listen to the Who ever. I'd rather listen to the Stooges. So I wasn't going to say no, for God's sake. So it was an amazing experience. And fortunately, me and Steve White didn't mess it up, but it went down very well.
Because Won't Get Fooled Again, that's not an easy song. You're having to sort of come in at the right moment. That is very tricky.
Very tricky, and it's quite tricky. It's not a bass line you can learn, particularly with only moments notice. So I just listen to it and thought, well, what are the bits that are really important? There's a few rundowns that John did that are really important. Everything else, I just worked the chords out and thought, right, well, I'll just play my own thing, because it's going to be better than me trying to remember someone else's bass line in front of 1/14 of the world when I don't really remember it. And also that stubborn thing going, well, I know what I'm going to play is going to be good. Not like, oh, I'm incredible, but I know what I'm going to play is going to work with the guitars, the drums, the vocals. So yeah, that's what I did. But what was funny though, was one of the guys who put it on, a guy called John Kennedy, who's basically the lawyer that put it on. He's Richard Ashcroft's manager, and he didn't even know I was playing with The Who until I told him about my book, sent him a little bit about playing with The Who, and he's like, oh my God, that was you on bass. This is like many, many years later. So that's like another nice little sort of circle of fate, I suppose.
And life is full of turning points. And there was a moment where, I don't know if it was DIY or something, but you really, really badly hurt your wrist. And ultimately, I think that have led you onto a new part of your life, which was more academia or involved with higher education universities.
Yeah, I mean, I had a horrendous wrist injury, put up some Halloween decorations, and I mean, you won't be able to see it in this light, but I've got this scar that
I can see, yeah, I can see now.
And I've only got a 12.5% back bend because my tendons, to put them back together, they had to make them really short.
Gosh.
So, yeah, and I'm not allowed to do press ups either in case I snap my tendons. But I couldn't play for 6 months, which was frightening because I also didn't know during those 6 months whether I'd ever be able to play again, because the hand surgeon was like, you're so lucky that you've got movement in your fingers, but we don't know if it's going to be enough to ever play the guitar again. Fantastic. But literally a week after it happened, I just, through a friend who was down at Bristol at university, asked me to, via the university asked him to ask me if I'd go in and just do like a masterclass about playing the bass. And I was like, well, I can't, but I can come in and talk to you about music. And like, oh yeah, come in and do it. So I did. They loved it and offered me a job, part-time job. And I was like, well, okay, maybe I'll never be able to play the guitar again. I don't want to ever be in that position of scraping coppers together to get some petrol. So why don't I try it? And I kind of enjoyed it for a bit. And then that led on through my wife, who was fed up with me complaining about these academic books about music I was reading, which were just written by well-meaning people who'd never made music, but used lots and lots of long words to describe it. She said, stop complaining, get yourself a PhD, which is easier said than done. But I ended up becoming a doctor of music. Yeah, I know.
One of the earlier positions that you were doing was at the University of South Wales, and there was a strange moment where you've got Richard Parfitt, who used to be in the 60-Foot Dolls.
Yes.
Was he doing your interview?
Yes, it was. It was really funny. He interviewed me, and the poor of the guy was a short list of 2 people. And the other guy didn't stand a chance because he recognized, he's like, what's the point? So I got interviewed by Richard, and obviously a board of like senior and middle management at the university. But I knew as soon as I started talking, they were going to offer me the position. They asked me to write them a new degree in pop music, so I did. And I was doing that whilst I was doing my PhD and whilst being on tour with Richard Ashcroft. So it was an insane time. We'd be like playing in, I don't know, Moscow, and everyone's gone out to see Red Square and the Kremlin. I'm staying in my hotel room, spell checking my PhD or whatever I might be doing. So I missed a lot of the world whilst writing my PhD. And I did a lot of it in dressing rooms, on aeroplanes, in hotel rooms. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And it's great to actually get that validation, because I literally dropped out of university, never went to any lectures.
Did you take the loan money?
I did. I took the grant and spent it all on guitars and amps, of course, and had to borrow the money off my sister, because by the time they wanted it back, I was like, well, I'm on the dole now. If you've kicked me out of uni, I'm on the dole. I can't pay you back. But it was an interesting period. But then I soon found out that academia is just big business. You know, there's not much, not for necessarily for most of the students, but for universities, particularly these days, it is about profit and loss. So you may as well be like trying to rationalize with Universal Records to do something creative, but it's not going to make any money.
But overall, so you've come through that, you've got your PhD, you've been touring the world with Richard Ashcroft supporting Oasis. Things must be good.
Oh,
Surely.
God, yeah. I mean, without sounding smug, but apart from, I'm in the house in Wales at the minute, which only it flooded while I was on tour in South America, which was pretty devastating. And we've got a house in Italy, and there was a flash flood on the hillside, which basically wiped out all my land just before I left South America. So anything to do with flooding aside, I am and I support Everton as well. So I should be an unhappy man. Even they're doing well at the minute. So everything is good. And I love playing with Rich because he's like the perfect artist for me because he means it. And we're good friends.
Some of the best artists give their band, you've still got a template to follow, but gives you some freedom. You're not playing exactly the same thing.
100%. I mean, even with Weller, there was like a huge scope. Even though you're a sideman, it's like feels like a band, it plays like a band. It's exactly the same with Rich. I mean, apart from we're going to start here and maybe end there and make sure we all get to the chorus at the right time. Beyond that, it's just like literally just four minds working as one, which is what a band is. There was at times in Ocean Colour singing in our peak where it was like telepathy. Same with the classic Weller band, which was me, the two Steves and Paul, and the current Ashcroft band, which is me, Tom, Steve, the guitarist, and Rich, obviously. There's this like telepathy about what we're doing, obviously driven by the main artist whose name's on the ticket. But it's that level of trust that they give you, which I absolutely love. And also, I love Richard because he hates rehearsing, and so do I. I've played some of Richard's songs. Well, all he's done is said the name of the song in the dressing room and said the first two chords. And I'm like, okay, and we just go and play it. Gosh. Yeah, which I mean, I wouldn't like to do that all the time because eventually it's going to come a cropper, but I'm definitely of the ilk that once you've played the song once in rehearsal, that's enough. Particularly by this stage, if you can't figure it out quickly after you've been doing it for quite a long time, then either the song shouldn't be played or you should retire.
So you'd look good on a donkey. Britpop, bass lines and baddest decisions. I've had a quick look and it's available in various outlets. So is it a case of people Googling it or is there a specific place people should go?
They get it from everywhere, from Amazon to Waterstones. If there was a book stockist that was started with X, Y, or Z, they could probably get it from there as well. But anywhere from Amazon to Waterstones, and then direct from my publishers for signed copies, and that's backstagebooks.com. And my publishers are brilliant. They're the perfect publishers for me because they do everything the wrong way around. Because I was getting some publishing deals offered to me or interest, and people were going, yeah, we can release it in 2027.
Really?
Yeah, this was like back in August this year, and I'm not waiting that long. These publishers got in touch with me, sent me an email, said, someone's passed us the book, we need to talk. Next day I spoke to them, and the next day I'd signed the contract, and they're like, we're releasing it in January. I'm like, oh, yes, great.
Cheers, Damon.
Yeah, brilliant. Right, mate, thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.